Let's talk Tanya for the 3rd of Cheshvan. In yesterday's Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explained and justified a passage from the Tzavos HaRevash, a book which collects the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which the opponents of Hasidim found to be problematic. Now, why were they so up in arms about this passage? So we have to understand that this was part really of a larger controversy that was raging at that time, something that we've talked about in the past, specifically when we learned chapter 7 of Shayachut V'Amunah, the controversy that regarded what's called Tzimtzum Kipshutai, which means that when the Kabbalists describe God before creation as having contracted himself, is that literal or is it not literal? So the opponents of Hasidism, led by the Vilna Gaon, they held Tzimtzum Kipshutai, they held that when the Kabbalists talk about God contracting himself, it's quite literal, which means that this world, there are many unsavory, undesirable elements here in this world. God does not exist within them. God remains outside of them, so to say. Yes, his providence extends over them. He has the ability to control them, but ultimately, we don't say that God expresses himself through them. And the Alter Rebbe came out swinging. Again, we learned about this earlier on, and he says, Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutai, we cannot take the contraction literally, and God is ultimately present and works through anything and through everything. And the Alter Rebbe says, if you look in the writings of the Arizal, plainly what I'm saying is over there. And the Alter Rebbe continues, and the Alter Rebbe says, in words which are very telling, he says, B'Shagam especially, that this idea which I'm expressing over here it's not really of the domain of Kabbalah, which, as we know, the Kabbalah is considered the hidden or the concealed part of the Torah. Rather, it is something which is revealed to us and to our children. We all believe, with a complete belief in that which the verse says, God says, I fill the heavens and the earth. And the verse has to be taken quite literally. And this is the simple faith that all Jewish people have, which is handed down to us by our parents, who always went bitmimus. They went simply with God. They didn't have to understand everything. Not everything had to make sense. After all, godliness is something which is well beyond that which we can understand, infinitely beyond that. And maybe we don't understand how God fills everything and God is present and everywhere, but that's part of an object of simple faith that all Jewish people have. And Alter Rebbe continues and he says, here you see a passage of the Tzavos HaRevash from a work of Chassidus, which seems to be puzzling. It seems even to be disrespectful to God to say that God is right now present within this non-Jew who is disturbing the Jew who is praying. And nevertheless, if we look, we see this is plainly present in the writings of the Arizal whose authority who everyone accepts. The Alter Rebbe says the same thing is true with anything that you might see in any of the works of Chassidus, even if it doesn't sound right, it might seem puzzling, there's an explanation for everything. However, the Alter Rebbe says, I don't have the time to go and to write these treatises and to explain every single one of the passages which might seem puzzling, but rather the Alter Rebbe says, and again, this letter is addressed to the opponents of Hasidim, and says, send for me someone, a prestigious person, a Torah scholar, and let that person come to me, and face to face, I'm willing to respond to any questions and any objections that person might have. And with that, we've concluded this letter, but there's an obvious takeaway over here for every single one of us. We all, in life, we encounter certain people or certain situations, and it seems that these people are intent on impeding our service of Hashem. It's not only that we have the ability to overcome these obstacles and overcome these hindrances. What the Alter Rebbe is telling us over here in this chapter is that this is an example of Golus HaShechina, the exile of the Shechina. It is the divine power right now that is being harnessed, and you might even want to say hijacked, in order ostensibly to disturb my service of God. But really, what is it? Asher shalat ha'adam ba'adam l'rale, it's all a trick, it's all a ploy. Ultimately, everything that happens is orchestrated by God, and its purpose is to bring me to a higher place in my service of God. But by using this obstacle as a springboard, I can actually serve God with even greater determination, with greater energy. After all, everything is Hashem. Even when it comes through Klippa, it is also Hashem, and it has a purpose, and its purpose is to get me to serve Hashem with a greater intensity. Again, we've concluded now this chapter. Tomorrow we start chapter 26, another long chapter on the topic. The Alter Rebbe there explains a perplexing passage of the Zohar.